As you can see, it's all back together again. Set the shutter, set the self-timer, release the shutter, the self-timer runs down, and the shutter fires. So what did I end up doing? Well, what I contemplated doing was taking this mechanism plate from a 3C, and I was going to remove all the components I didn't want. But there were a couple of strikes against that. I'd already decided that I was going to need to drill out a couple of the holes to a larger size, and I decided I could probably do that. But this post, which the shutter release pivots on, is loose. It's broken free from the mechanism plate, and that's why this mechanism plate is here. It's been replaced in a shutter. They get damaged in the 3C and the 2C when some bright spark puts the lens in the wrong way, whereupon it instantly jams in the bayonet mount, and then when they force it to get it back off, basically they turn the whole front plate of the shutter, and the front plate of the shutter is only located by this pin, and so that pin bends and breaks away from the mechanism plate. But all that aside, so this plate was not going to be a goer. My next option was to remove this rivet here. I hoped actually I'd be able to drive that pin out. Take this little bracket here, which is the piece that blocks the action of the blade actuating ring when you set the self-timer, and transfer this to this, which was the original mechanism plate. I tried driving that rivet out, not on this plate, on another one, and I was not successful. I just made a mess of it. If I wanted to get that out, I would have to run a milling cutter in there to cut that outside edge off before I could get that out. And I decided that was probably going to heroic efforts. But then I sorted through my box of parts. I was looking for another mechanism plate, a better one, if I was going to go to those extremes. And I discovered one that looked just like this, which is the one that's come out of the shutter. It was a Retinette mechanism plate, and it had got into the box of 3C parts. And so that's the mechanism plate I used. So we've got a different mechanism plate. All other parts are the original. This shutter's all in good functioning order now, bearing in mind that this shutter case is, we know it's cracked, but it's straight. The shutter works smoothly, the aperture opens and closes easily. That'll be fine to put back in the camera. So I'll just check my speeds and make sure that it's accurate. It looks pretty good to me at the moment. And assuming that's good, I'll be back here and we'll close this thing up. Well, I'm going to remove this red paint or lacquer that's on there because I don't need it. And it looks messy. And the same with this splash on the inside. So I'll just get some acetone and move that. It looks good. And this other bit. You can see someone really splashed this stuff about. Must have been using a 2-inch brush. Alright, that looks better. Okay, so our shutter. Well, this one has the EV value shutter. So we get our two rings here together. You can see the teeth here and the little teeth on that ring there. So we know that somewhere on that line we should be good. So here I've just got these two randomly lined up, where f8 and at 1/8 of a second and f5.6 are lined up to each other. We're trying to couple our ring here to this point here. There's a notch in here that'll pick that up. Our aperture should couple to this ring at the back. There's a little notch in the back of that ring. That's sitting there now. That looks good. Our shutter speed settings plate here can go on the ring. The retainer, I'll put a wipe of molybdenum paste on the detents for the shutter speeds. This can go on. It's got an alignment hole there, lines up with that pin. And if I put the front retaining ring in place, there to wriggle, make sure it's seated. Seems a bit tight there. No, something's just dropped into place. I can hear the click stops, that's much better. That feels good. Might be a bit tight. Let's back that round one more notch. I can see that the aperture setting is moving with the control ring. That all looks pretty good. Let's take that round to there. Put the little lock screw in position. Here's the dress ring for the front of the shutter, where their speeds and things all show at the top here, so that must be the top. This must go here. Three tiny screws that hold that plate in place. They're all in position. Just go around and tighten them up. And these two on this front ring, I'll just check that they are snug. And that is our shutter, ready now to have the lenses put back in it. So I'll just have to clean those and pop them in position. First task, I'll remove that unnecessary red blob of paint there. That was doing nothing on that surface except looking ugly. There's not even any sign that it really run down underneath where it could do anything at all. Right. So, taking some naphtha. First I'll clean the threads here. This is grease and accumulated dirt in there. I'm keeping away from the glass surfaces themselves while I'm getting rid of this grease, because otherwise you get transfer grease to those glass surfaces. It's often very tiring trying to get it off the glass afterwards. Yeah, I can see the different colours of grease there. There's some silvery grey stuff and there's some yellow or orange coloured grease. So we have the remains of two, lots of grease there. And the main reason to get rid of all the old grease is that it will have dried out, gone sticky, and by gathering up dust it'll be more of a grinding paste than a lubricant now. Alright, that's pretty good. The rear group probably doesn't need anything at all. Some glass cleaner on these. Now that front group doesn't look very happy at all, so I'm not sure how well that'll clean up. Normal domestic glass cleaner. Put some on a cotton bud. It looks a little bit hazy on the inside, but the outside looks appalling, so let's do the inside first. And that's good for a start. See if I can do anything with that. When you're faced with really dirty glass like that, you need to have multiple attempts to clean it and be very gentle at the start. And try and lift off any dust and rubbish. Once you've got the dust and rubbish lifted off, then you might attempt to polish the glass a bit, hopefully hoping that there's some sticky deposit that will come off with the glass cleaner, and that might be the case. But if you just jump in at the offset at the start and start rubbing away at it furiously, you're likely to be grinding in dust and grit particles and making it worse than it was to start off with. I can see the cotton bud here has discoloration on it from stuff that's picked up off that glass. It's certainly coating marks here, probably not much more than that, but it's scratched in, and it's probably from over enthusiastic cleaning and the occasional finger shoved in there for good measure. I can see a bit of haze around the outside edge here, so I'll try chasing in against that. If that was the only problem, you would just simply stop down a little bit, you'd never see it probably. It's not wonderful to look at. No. It's probably could be prone to a little bit of haze with a lens like that, but if you're using a lens hood and the sun's over your shoulder, very likely you'd never notice it. Just making sure there are no smears on that inner surface. The outer surface will have to take its chances, I think. Okay, so that's that one. It's as good as it's likely to get. This one, since it hasn't had fingers all over it, it's likely to be in much better condition. That glass looks very, very good. That looks good. We can screw that into the front of the shutter. One last blow with the rocket blower to get rid of any dust. It screws in easily. And I just need the tool to tighten that up, which was here all along. You don't need to tighten them up a long way. You're not likely to come loose unless the outer binds in there from dried grease. It has to be very hard grease. I'm thinking of the green agfa grease. That's the only reason it would be likely to bind in there. Just checking that thread. It's pretty smooth. It's not as free as they often are, but that's okay. That'll be fine. There's no great advantage in the focus being incredibly free and easy to move, because it just means you're likely to bump it accidentally when you're setting things. Okay, so our rear glass, clean that. The inner surface again looks pretty good to me. A little bit of dust on there. That looks great. Put that on the shutter. And the rear group doesn't need to be any more than finger tight. And the rearmost surface, blow off any loose dust. it looks not as good as the internal surfaces, but miles away. Much better than the front surface. That tells me that the damage here is just from clumsy usage, really. That all looks good. This can go back on the camera body. Here's the shim that was on there. And then I can set the focus, which is exactly the same procedure as I used for the previous camera. On this shutter we have to get the flash contact connected. So we've got this little plastic connector. Got to get the wire in there and tighten that up. This is always awkward. No. Okay, we've got a connection. Now my retaining ring, my spacer is on the back there. See if I can get this shutter to drop in at the top. I'm just looking for my. Oh, it's connected to the shutter release. I'm not sure if the other one is lining up. My shim, the spacer on the back of the shutter is not seated correctly. It may be difficult to get that seated correctly. I'll see if I can pull it back here. Yes, that's what's happened. That's twisted round. It's not seated over the pin correctly. No, the flash contact, that little plastic thing is fallen over and it's jamming things up, I think. Oh, is that it? It seems to be sitting high. We're not sitting flat properly. I think that flash connector, that little plastic thing, is not dropping into the hole in the front plate here properly. It is most certainly not. I'm not sure what the secret is with that. That appears to be it. So I'll put the retaining ring in place. I'm supporting this with my fingers from underneath so that I don't disturb the positioning. See if I can get my retaining ring started with the tip of a screwdriver. I can. And let's try the tool for tightening it. That's all working. And it only remains to set the focus and close that up. The focus scale ring here is quite dirty. That's not uncommon. I suppose it certainly goes well with the state of the lens at the front. The camera has travelled for most of its life without a lens cap of any sort, and it certainly shows. It may have been in a case, who would know. Anyway, so I'll just pop this on here, check to see that it fits. I'm going to back those screws out so that it's an easy fit on there. No, that's not bad actually. That'll do. Right, so setting the focus. What do we want? We want a ground glass screen of some sort. I've got a focus screen from an SLR that works nicely for this, and it's got a split image in the middle. A focus aid, which makes it even better. But basically the procedure is simple. We want to set the shutter to B, set the aperture to wide open, which in this case is f3.5. I want to put a cable release in here so I can lock the shutter open while I'm checking it. And we're using a focus, and then we just need a suitable target. And I've got some power poles, telegraph poles way on the horizon there. They make a wonderful infinity target. Back shortly. Oh, look what popped out. A film chip. Here we have a focus screen, split image in the middle. And jeweler's loop so you can see what you're doing. Open the back of the camera. Find my cable release. Cock the shutter. Release the shutter. This cable release locks. So that's locked open on B. My focus screen goes here. It's on those bright rails. Needs to be in the middle. Nicely centered. And that split image is what I'm going to be looking for. And I want my infinity target to appear nice and sharp at that point. Well, that looks spot on to me. Now take note of where we are with this. You'll see that our red triangle here is in line with the edge at the beginning of the character H there. So that's correct for infinity. We know that's going to be good. I'm going to put some grease on this. I'll use, you don't need to use helical grease, particularly if you haven't got some. It won't hurt to use it, but any fine grease will do nicely. I've got a synthetic which is fine for this purpose. With any non-rangefinder camera in particular, there's no advantage in having the focus very loose, because you have to set the distance manually, and then you've got the camera up to your eye to take the photo. You've got no way of checking the focus when you've got the camera up to your eye, other than knowing that the focus scale is where you set it. So if it moves easily, you can bump it, you can be out of focus, and you can lose a photo. I'll put a touch of grease on here. Alright, a little touch of synthetic grease. A few spots around the perimeter. Make sure there's no dust in that lens. Get that lens started in the thread. Okay. Now we know we want the red triangle to line up with that edge of the H character there. Now that is almost certainly back from the fully wound in position, part of a turn. So it's probably not there, it's probably there. I'll check that. This one, normally you can't get an extra turn, but you might be able to in this case. Let's have a look. So I'm expecting it to be right there, and I'll check. See how right or wrong you can be.
Oh, it is. It was another turn.
Okay. I know what's happening here. I've started that on the wrong thread. Problem with multi-start threads. This must be a 2-start thread. Let's just try that. Might have it exactly back where I had it before, but we'll wait and see. I have. Let's just try getting that in the right way up. I thought that this was a single start thread, but now I think it's probably a double start thread. Yes, it's a multi-start thread, and I'd started it in a different place. And that's correctly focused. The edge of that letter H lines up with the red line there exactly as I expected it to. And see if I can get this focus scale ring on here without bumping my lens too much. Is it sitting on there? It nearly is. Need to loosen that screw up slightly. Yep, it's dropped over. That's up against the infinity stop. You can do up those 3 little screws. Check that that moves smoothly, comes up to the stop nicely. And most importantly, when you bring it to the close focus position, it doesn't pass the stop and allow you to completely unscrew the lens. That means that everything's working exactly as it should. Our shutter all looks good. Let's try the self-timer again. So take it off B, of course, we don't want B. Let's put it on a quarter of a second, f5.6, crank the shutter, set the self-timer. The self-timer is running down. The shutter at the moment, of course, is still closed. And you saw the shutter open and close. So that's that. I don't think there's much more to add to this one. I suppose we could check the flash sync for good measure. Set the shutter speed to something more exciting. Let's say 250th. Find the flash. Let's try the flash. It's charged up. Shutter's cocked. And the flash fired nicely. So there we go. Mid-production Retinette type 022. That's the shutter stripped out and serviced. And that's all you need to do. And you're exceptionally unlikely to strike that problem I had with the self-timer. I've only struck that a handful of times. There's no easy cure to that, short of replacing parts, and for that, of course, you're looking for an organ donor.